You don't tip?
No, I don't believe in it.
In 2025, tipping practices in the United States have become a controversial and rather touchy subject, with the tradition coming under heavy scrutiny. So, do you think tipping is out of control? If so, then join us as we take a look at some of the reasons why.
I don't tip because society says I have to.
Expansion of tipping expectations.
So it's 30%? Is that what you're saying?
Tipping is by no means a modern practice. In fact, the tradition dates back centuries. However, in the U.S., the practice has become an accepted and expected standard, for the most part. Most patrons have absolutely no issue leaving a gratuity for a job well done, especially due to the unfortunate problem of low wages in most establishments where tipping is common. However, tipping has never been a mandatory action.
Not mandatory, but highly suggested.
And was, by and large, usually limited to dine-in restaurants and other such businesses. This isn't the case nowadays, as the practice seems to be on the rise around the country. Tipping is now expected in more places than ever before, including fast food outlets and coffee franchises. However, it doesn't stop there, as the practice has even bled over to touchscreen digital self-service kiosks, if you can wrap your head around that one. This phenomenon, often referred to as tip creep or tipflation, has led to consumer frustration. Tipflation reared its unwelcome head during the 2020 pandemic, as did many unpleasant issues like inflation, shrinkflation, and all the other unwanted flations. Of course, this is causing folks to come down with a case of tipping fatigue. Today, the time-honored practice of tipping has now become an expectation rather than an act of appreciation or reward for hard work and stellar service.
Tip! Did you just say tip?
Digital payment systems prompting tips.
Digital money.
Remember the days before advanced technology? Sure, it's commonplace now, but not too long ago, the tech that we take for granted in everyday life was only seen in movies and video games. Today, however, the world enjoys all the wonderful convenience that comes with the modern high-tech world. This is true in just about every business you can think of, including the restaurant industry. From advanced kitchen equipment that's able to prepare dishes in half the time, to the devices that make taking and placing orders a bit easier for servers, new tech means an efficient restaurant. However, with all the good that comes from the advancement of technology, there are also some problems that arise due to technology.
More money, more problems.
One of those issues now plaguing the restaurant industry is the proliferation of digital payment platforms with preset tipping options. On the surface, this is not such a bad thing. However, this has increased the frequency of tip requests. Customers often feel pressured to tip, even for minimal service interactions, which in reality defeats the most important purpose for tipping, a job well done. These issues are not limited to restaurants by any means. The digital payment tipping problem extends to all businesses using this type of technology. It's no longer out of the ordinary to see businesses such as Uber and even some delivery services handing over the portable debit machine only to see the dreaded multi-tiered tip percentages flash on screen. Feeling forced to tip is enough to cause most folks to sour on the idea of tipping altogether.
I don't tip.
What?
Inflation and economic pressures.
That's inflation for you.
The economy is a fun and often anxiety-inducing thing. When an economy is booming, the folks are out there spending. It's par for the course. A healthy economy usually brings with it consumers with more disposable income to use as they see fit. However, the past few years have not been an economic paradise, and the practice of tipping has become less of a practice and more of a dying art form. With the uncertainty surrounding the events of 2020 came a rather brutal wave of inflation, which the globe is still feeling the effects of today.
And the economy is so bad.
Businesses from restaurants to retail stores have been experiencing supply chain issues, market traffic dry up, and the risk of permanently closing up shop. Also, the average worker has been hit the hardest by the recent economic issues. Rising costs of living have made consumers less eager to let go of their spending money, leading to reluctance to tip for services where it was not traditionally expected. It's hard to want to give your server, driver, or whomever a generous tip when you're having a hard enough time keeping the lights on, paying the rent, or buying cereal. Nevertheless, the stigma surrounding unexpected tipping isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
I can get tips, big tips.
First time here? Well, you don't need a tip calculator to hit that subscribe button, so go ahead and smash it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Lack of clear tipping guidelines.
Do you have the guidelines?
Occasionally, you may decide that after passing by the window of that fancy store to actually go in and treat yourself, but find you have no idea what you want. That is, of course, until that helpful staff member makes their way over and is gracious enough to provide you with everything you need to make your decision. Once you're at the cash register and it's time to pay, you find yourself in an unpleasant tipping situation when you're presented with a handful of tipping options. What do? If this has happened to you, don't worry, because you are far from being alone here. In fact, many consumers are uncertain about when and how much to tip. This is especially true when it comes to an establishment that would normally not be a place where the service is part of the price. Unexpected tipping prompts can often lead to a barrage of feelings, as you don't want to embarrass yourself by not tipping or tipping too little, while also not wanting to be overly generous.
I'm not made of money.
Furthermore, these tip prompts can also lead to anger, and the last thing you want to do is make an uncomfortable scene even worse by throwing a small fit. This cocktail of confusion also contributes to the dreaded tipping fatigue. Oh, and if you think the idea of tipping in a retail environment is a wacky one, you haven't heard the half of it yet.
It's more.
Employer reliance on tips to offset wages.
Now let me talk about wages.
You've likely heard this conversation before. I don't know how you can work at that place, followed by, the tips are amazing. In fact, one of the most appealing aspects of working in a restaurant, for example, is the opportunity to make an enormous amount of cash in tips. The same can be said for servers and bartenders. On any given night, a server at a club or a talented bartender can potentially make their rent in tips. However, the reason gratuities are encouraged is that the businesses that tend to offer tips are not exactly offering their employees the highest of wages. Those servers over at that fancy club are more likely to be making minimum wage or below, and the same can be said for those bartenders.
Solidly below average.
Unfortunately, while this practice used to be relegated to clubs and bars, more businesses than ever are now using tips to supplement low wages, placing the burden of fair compensation on customers rather than ensuring employees receive a living wage. In fact, even a business like a massage parlor may shock a potential customer with a tip prompt, which was previously unheard of. And no, not talking about that kind of massage parlor. This business model may seem like a quick, painless, and easy way for a business to try to save money, but adding to the customer's expense is never a good idea.
What are you thinking?
Generational differences in tipping attitudes.
She's from a different generation.
When it comes to tipping, attitudes may vary. For instance, if you were to ask the average server how they feel about tipping, odds are they'd say they're all for it. As mentioned earlier, many who work in businesses that encourage gratuities become dependent on those tips just to get by. However, not everyone is as enthusiastic about those gratuities as your average server or bartender, especially the youth crowd. Younger generations, particularly Gen Z, are more critical of tipping culture, viewing it as out of control and an unfair practice that should be reformed or abolished. Many Gen Zers have made it known that it's the obligation of the business to make sure that an employee's wage is up to livable standards, thus eliminating the need for gratuities. And the pressure is being felt more by folks from Gen Z to tip than any other generation.
So I was under so much pressure.
Another reason for the Gen Z pushback regarding tipping is simply that the Gen Z generation has the least amount of wealth. So the anti-tip attitude may be more of a "I ain't got it to give" than a "I don't feel I need to."
I'm not poor, I'm broke.
Increased service charges.
Price is too high.
When heading out to have a nice dinner, ordering an Uber, or both, it's obvious to most that you will encounter some sort of tipping prompt. It is what it is, and whether you agree with the practice or not, most people comply. However, it's one thing to go in with the knowledge that a tip is part of the experience, but also having to worry about an additional service fee is a harder pill to swallow. Some businesses add mandatory service charges to bills, which only adds to the lightening of your bank account. Fees such as merchant surcharges can be added by a business depending on the payment method, like a debit or credit card, so maybe do leave home without it. Luckily, many payment card network operators forbid surcharging for prepaid cards. Another pesky additional charge many customers may run into are service and convenience fees. These little darlings allow eligible merchants to charge a service or convenience fee for certain types of transactions. On the upside, businesses that choose to charge those fees for credit or debit payments are not allowed to surcharge, so that's one relief. This is leading customers to feel they're being double charged when also being prompted to tip.
They have to pay.
Social media amplification.
But it's all over social media.
The various social media platforms are not just a place to post a hilarious video of your friend water skiing off the roof of his shed and into a frozen lake, though most are happy this form of entertainment thrives there. Social media has become the go-to avenue for politics, medical advice, both sound and pseudo, workout tips, and scientific inquiry, both logical and controversial. Yes, if you have an opinion or a question, social media is likely your first stop to either Confirmationville or Disappointed Town. Now, since all the most pressing topics of the day end up on either one or all social media sites, it should come as no surprise that the subject of tipping has popped up in recent years. Folks have taken to platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram to voice their opinion on the practice of tipping.
Everyone has very strong opinions about it.
These sites have amplified discussions and criticisms of tipping practices, bringing greater attention to consumer dissatisfaction. One pressing topic floating around on social media is confusion about where digital tips actually go and how they're distributed. The overall lack of transparency has folks on various platforms collectively raising their eyebrow, and not in a cool Dwayne Johnson way. What's more powerful than one person's opinion? How about a few million?
I did post it on social media.
Political and legislative debates.
Because it's politics, man. Politics.
Political talk is pretty popular right now as the USA prepares for a president to take his second run at commanding the most powerful country on the planet. However, once political discourse stops being about red versus blue, the folks up there on Capitol Hill tend to get back to the most pressing matters. Or at least that's what usually happens. Of course, the state of the economy is always a pertinent issue, and with economic talk, everything from business stability to wage problems enter the discussion. Tipping has now become a political issue, with discussion about abolishing below minimum wages for tipped workers and ensuring fair compensation through legislation. Despite the loss of a potentially huge payday thanks to tips, the idea of a worker who usually relies on tips actually being able to buy groceries with their paycheck is just as appealing. Remember, those glorious tips are never a guarantee.
Not guaranteed, though.
Cultural shifts towards fair wages.
Want fair wages for my people.
The changing of cultural norms is inevitable. What one generation finds acceptable, another may want nothing to do with things of the past. Social norms and cultural shifts are what keeps society ever evolving, and the tipping practice seems to be one of those issues that today's culture is eyeing to be canceled. As mentioned earlier, the subject of the tipping process being abolished in favor of fair wages has made it all the way to Washington as attitudes begin to change. There's a growing movement advocating for fair wages without relying on tips, challenging the traditional tipping model and calling for systemic change. With a bit of luck, perhaps we've seen the last of the days when a server has to keep those fingers crossed after taking an order in hopes that there's a generous tip headed their way just to pay the electricity bill.
But I mean, it's tipping automatically. It's for the birds.
No tip needed for another great video. Stay right here to keep on watching and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new video.